My name is Victoria Whitmore. I'm 47 years old, divorced, and I live alone now. Until recently, I believed I'd earned the right to be treated with basic respect, especially by my own family. I was wrong. I stood at my sister Mallory's wedding reception, watching guests laugh and dance under strings of white lights. The evening had been beautiful so far. Then my father grabbed the microphone. I thought he was about to toast the bride and groom. Instead, he turned toward my table and smiled, that cold, calculated smile I'd learned to recognize too late in life. "I want to take a moment to acknowledge my other daughter, Victoria," he began. My stomach dropped. Still figuring life out at 47. Still recovering from that divorce. Still trying to find her place. Laughter rippled through the room like a wave I couldn't escape. People I'd known for years were smiling, some even nodding along. My father kept going, his voice dripping with mock sympathy. "But hey, we all bloom at different speeds, right?" More laughter. I sat frozen, unable to move or speak. My sister stared at her champagne glass. My father finally set down the microphone, looking satisfied. That's when I realized this wasn't impulsive. He'd planned every word. I didn't cry. I refused to give him that satisfaction. I stood slowly, my legs trembling beneath my dress, and walked back to my seat. The room had gone quiet now, the laughter fading into uncomfortable whispers. I kept my face blank, my shoulders straight. My sister still wouldn't look at me. My father had already turned away, laughing with someone at the bar. I sat down and stared at the untouched cake on my plate. A cousin leaned over and squeezed my hand, but said nothing. What could she say? Everyone had heard it. Everyone had laughed. I wanted to leave, but walking out would only confirm what my father had implied, that I was weak, broken, a failure. So I stayed. I sat through the rest of the reception with a polite smile frozen on my face, nodding when people spoke to me, pretending everything was fine. But inside, something had shifted. The silence inside me was louder than any of the laughter had been. And in that silence, I started to notice things I'd been ignoring for years. Small comments. Patterns. The way my father controlled conversations, controlled people. I overheard him later that night, telling someone about his business instincts and how he knew how to handle people. Something clicked. This wasn't the first time he'd done this to someone. Later that night, after most guests had left, my cousin Rita pulled me aside. We stood near the coat check, away from the remaining crowd. She looked nervous, like she was debating whether to speak. Finally, she said quietly, "Your father did the same thing to your mother." I blinked at her, confused. "What do you mean?" Rita glanced around to make sure no one was listening. Years ago, at a company event, he made a speech that humiliated her in front of everyone. Business partners, employees, family. A few months later, he pushed her out of the family company completely. Took her name off everything. My hands went cold. Why didn't anyone tell me? Rita's expression was pained. "Your mother asked us not to. She didn't want you and Mallory caught in the middle. But after tonight," she trailed off, shaking her head. "He does this, Victoria. He humiliates people publicly to break them down. Then he takes what he wants while they're still reeling." I thought about my mother, who died 5 years ago. I thought about how quiet she'd become in her final years, how distant from the family business she'd always helped build. A pattern I couldn't ignore was forming in my mind. And I realized I might already be trapped in something much bigger than a cruel wedding speech. 2 days after the wedding, my phone rang. I almost didn't answer when I saw it was my father. But curiosity won. His voice was cold, calm, transactional. No apology. No acknowledgement of what he'd done. "Victoria, I'm reviewing some family financial matters," he said, as if we were strangers discussing business. "I think it's best if you stop asking questions about anything tied to your mother's estate." I hadn't been asking questions. "What are you talking about?" I asked carefully. He sighed, impatient. "I know you've been digging around. Just leave it alone. Your mother's affairs are settled. There's nothing there for you." The line went dead before I could respond. I sat staring at my phone, my heart racing. I hadn't been digging around, but now I wanted to. Why would my mother's name still matter 5 years after her death? What was he so worried about me finding? That evening, I started searching through old boxes in my closet, looking for anything my mother might have left behind. Legal documents, letters, anything that might explain my father's strange call. Then I remembered something. A folder my mother had given me years ago, pressed into my hands with an urgent look. Just in case, she'd said. I'd tucked it away and forgotten about it. Until now. Why would my mother's name still matter? I found the folder at the bottom of a storage box, beneath old photo albums and tax returns. The label read, "Important, Victoria," in my mother's neat handwriting. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside were notes, printed emails, and incomplete legal documents. Most of it was confusing. Financial statements, meeting notes, references to the family business my father still ran. But one name kept appearing over and over: mine. There were emails between my mother and a lawyer I didn't recognize. Phrases like protecting Victoria's interests and ensuring she can't be excluded jumped out at me. My mother had been planning something before she died. She'd been protecting me from something, or someone. I spread the documents across my kitchen table and tried to piece them together. Some were dated from 10 years ago. Others were more recent, from just months before my mother's death. One document had my name typed at the top in bold letters: beneficiary rights, Victoria L. Whitmore. I didn't understand all the legal language, but I understood enough. My mother had set something in motion, something my father either didn't know about or hoped I'd never discover. And one document, a single page with my mother's signature at the bottom, had my name on it in a way that made my pulse quicken. This wasn't just paperwork. This was protection. I hesitated before calling a lawyer. Part of me still wanted my father's approval, even after everything. I hated that weakness in myself, but it was there. Decades of conditioning don't disappear overnight. Finally, I contacted the attorney whose name appeared repeatedly in my mother's documents. His name was Mr. Howard Brennan. When I explained who I was, he agreed to meet with me immediately. In his office, I spread out everything I'd found. He examined each document carefully, his expression growing more serious with each page. The silence stretched so long I thought he might tell me it was nothing, that I'd misunderstood. Then he looked up at me and said one sentence that made my hands shake. "Your father isn't as untouchable as he thinks." I leaned forward. "What does that mean?" Mr. Brennan tapped one of the documents. "Your mother established legal protections for your financial interests in the family business before she passed. Your father signed off on some of these agreements years ago, probably thinking they'd never be enforced. But they're ironclad." He explained that my mother had quietly secured my stake in certain assets, including property and business shares, in a way that couldn't be easily dissolved. My father hadn't erased me from the family finances, he'd just buried me, hoping I'd never dig deep enough to find what was mine. But activating this protection would require patience and perfect timing. Over the next week, Mr. Brennan explained the full scope of what my mother had done. She'd anticipated that my father might try to push me out, just like he'd done to her. So she'd created a series of legal safeguards, some visible, some hidden, that protected my inheritance and my claim to a portion of the family business. The key was in the timing. If I acted too quickly or confronted my father directly, he could find ways to delay or complicate things. But if I waited for him to make certain moves, particularly around the business or estate, then the protections my mother had built would activate automatically. "Your mother was brilliant," Mr. Brennan said with quiet admiration. "She knew exactly how your father operates. She built tripwires into the system." I thought about my mother's final years, how withdrawn she'd seemed. Now I understood why. She hadn't been giving up. She'd been planning, protecting, ensuring that her daughters wouldn't be left powerless. Mr. Brennan leaned back in his chair. "The question is, are you willing to wait? Because confronting him now would ruin everything." I thought about the wedding, the laughter, the humiliation. Every instinct screamed at me to call my father and demand answers. But I didn't. I stayed silent. I would let him believe the wedding had broken me, that I'd given up. He would mistake my silence for surrender. And that would be his biggest mistake. The hardest part was the silence. Every day, I wanted to pick up the phone and scream at my father. I wanted to tell my sister what I'd found, to explain why our mother had been pushed aside. But Mr. Brennan's words echoed in my mind, Patience wins this. So I stayed quiet. I stopped calling my sister, stopped attending family events, stopped asking questions. I let my father think his speech had done exactly what he'd intended, crushed my spirit and pushed me out of the picture. During those weeks, I focused on myself. I started running in the mornings, something I hadn't done in years. I organized my apartment, cleaned out closets, threw away things that reminded me of my failed marriage. I read books I'd been meaning to read. I built routines that had nothing to do with my family or their approval. Slowly, I started to feel stronger. Not because I was preparing for a fight, but because I was learning to exist without needing their validation. Meanwhile, my father grew more comfortable. I heard through relatives that he'd been making jokes about me, saying I was finally learning my place. He'd grown arrogant, confident that his public humiliation had worked. He'd made the mistake of thinking silence meant defeat. But my silence wasn't surrender. It was strategy. And soon he would understand the difference. Then the calls stopped. My sister Mallory, who used to text me at least once a week, went completely silent. When I tried reaching out, she sent brief, cold replies. Busy. Talk later. Nothing more. I asked a cousin what was happening, and she hesitated before answering. Your father's been saying things, she admitted quietly. He's telling people you're unstable, that you're holding grudges, that you've been acting strangely since the wedding. I felt myself being erased in real time. My father was rewriting the narrative, painting me as the problem, isolating me from the family before I could even defend myself. It was exactly what he'd done to my mother. I wanted to fight back, to tell everyone the truth, but Mr. Brennan's advice held me steady. Let him overplay his hand, he'd said. He will. They always do. 3 weeks after the wedding, I received a letter. It came in a formal envelope with a law firm's return address I didn't recognize. Inside was a single page informing me that, due to concerns about family unity and financial stability, my father was reviewing all estate and business arrangements. The letter strongly suggested I refrain from pursuing claims or making inquiries that could complicate family matters. It was meant to intimidate me, and it almost worked. But when I showed it to Mr. Brennan, he actually smiled. The letter wasn't illegal, but it was sloppy, and that sloppiness revealed something my father had been hiding for years. Mr. Brennan pointed to a specific paragraph in the letter. This is interesting, he said, tapping the page. Your father is claiming sole authority over estate decisions. But according to the documents your mother filed, he doesn't have that authority. Not entirely. He explained that the letter contained a contradiction. My father was asserting control over assets that, legally, required my consent to alter. By sending this letter, he'd accidentally revealed that he was trying to make moves he wasn't fully entitled to make. He's nervous, Mr. Brennan said. He knows something's out there, but he's not sure what. So he's trying to scare you into silence before you figure it out. The realization hit me like a punch. My father's confidence was an act. He was afraid. We now had leverage, real legal leverage, but only if we waited for the right moment. Mr. Brennan advised me to respond to the letter with a brief, polite note saying I had no immediate concerns. Nothing more. Let him think he's won, he said. Then we wait for him to make his next move. So I wrote the letter. Short, courteous, completely non-threatening. I mailed it and went back to my quiet life, rebuilding my routines, strengthening myself. 2 months passed. 2 months of silence, of patience, of letting my father grow comfortable in his arrogance. And then, everything changed. He made a public move that backfired spectacularly. And my phone exploded with calls. During those 2 months, I focused entirely on rebuilding myself. I stopped checking my family's social media. I stopped worrying about what my sister thought of me. I built a life that didn't revolve around their approval or their drama. I took up painting, something I'd loved as a teenager but had abandoned. I reconnected with old friends who had nothing to do with my family. I even started seeing a therapist, working through years of conditioning and manipulation I hadn't fully recognized until now. Slowly, I began to feel like myself again, or maybe for the first time. Meanwhile, my father grew more confident. I heard through distant relatives that he was making big plans for the family business, talking about restructuring and legacy. He'd stopped mentioning me entirely, which I took as a good sign. He thought I was gone, erased, irrelevant. He was so comfortable that he stopped being careful. And that's when Mr. Brennan called with news. He's filed paperwork to restructure the business ownership, he said, barely containing his excitement. He's trying to consolidate everything under his name before the end of the fiscal year. I didn't fully understand what that meant, but Mr. Brennan did. This is what we've been waiting for, he explained. By making this move, he's triggered every protection your mother put in place. The trap had been set years ago. My father had just walked right into it. Now it starts, Mr. Brennan said quietly. My father made his announcement at a small family gathering I hadn't been invited to. He stood in front of relatives and business associates and declared his plan to streamline operations and secure the family legacy. He spoke about protecting what he'd built, about making smart decisions for future generations. He positioned himself as the hero, the steady hand guiding the family forward. What he didn't realize was that his announcement activated everything my mother had carefully constructed. The moment he filed those restructuring documents, automatic notifications went out to multiple parties, lawyers, accountants, financial advisors who'd been waiting years for this exact trigger. My mother had built the system like a series of dominoes. One push from my father, and everything started falling. Mr. Brennan called me that evening, his voice calm but purposeful. It's time. Are you ready? I took a deep breath. Yes. He explained that over the next few days, various parties would start reaching out, to my father, to me, to others in the family. The documents my mother had filed would surface. Questions would be asked. The truth would come to light, not because I'd forced it, but because my father had triggered it himself. Don't answer any calls yet, Mr. Brennan advised. Let them pile up. Let your father scramble. When you're ready, we'll respond with clarity and strength. I agreed. And then I waited. The first call came 2 days later. The call was from the family's accountant, a man named Mr. Warren who'd worked with my father for decades. He sounded nervous, uncertain, completely unlike his usual confident self. Victoria, I need to speak with you about some financial matters that have come to my attention, he said carefully. Are you aware of certain documents filed by your late mother regarding the family business? I kept my voice neutral. I'm aware of some things. He paused, clearly hoping I'd elaborate. When I didn't, he continued. There are some complications with your father's recent filings. I wanted to confirm you're being properly represented. I said simply. Another pause. I see. Well, if you need anything clarified, please don't hesitate to reach out. I thanked him and ended the call. Within an hour, another call came in. Then another. Each one was someone connected to the family business or estate, lawyers, advisors, even a distant uncle who served on the company board. They all wanted the same thing: to understand what was happening, to figure out which side they should be on, to protect themselves from whatever storm was brewing. I didn't answer most of the calls. I let them go to voicemail, let the messages pile up. Each one made it clearer that my father's careful control was slipping. He'd always been the one with all the information, all the power. Now, suddenly, there were questions he couldn't answer. And through it all, one person hadn't called yet. My father himself. That silence told me everything. He was panicking. By the end of the week, my voicemail was completely full. Relatives I hadn't heard from in years were calling, their voices ranging from concerned to accusatory. What's going on? Why didn't you tell us? Your father says this is a misunderstanding. Some were clearly on my father's side, calling to scold me for causing problems. Others seemed genuinely confused, caught between the version of events my father had told them and the legal documents that were now surfacing. A few even apologized for the wedding, for laughing, for not standing up for me. I listened to each message once, then saved them. Evidence, Mr. Brennan had said. Everything is evidence. My sister Mallory called 4 times in one day. I didn't answer. I wasn't ready to talk to her yet, wasn't sure if I ever would be. The betrayal of her silence at the wedding still stung too much. The flood of calls created chaos. People were demanding answers, taking sides, trying to piece together what was happening. And at the center of it all was my father, who'd spent decades controlling the narrative, suddenly losing his grip. Mr. Brennan checked in daily. "How are you holding up?" he'd ask. "I'm fine," I'd tell him. And I was. Because unlike everyone else, I wasn't scrambling for answers. I already had them. I was just waiting for the right moment to use them. That moment came when my father finally called, his voice tight and controlled and absolutely terrified. When my phone rang and I saw my father's name, I almost let it go to voicemail like all the others. But Mr. Brennan had said this call would come, and we'd planned for it. I answered. "Victoria." His voice was different, tight, controlled, but with an edge I'd never heard before. "Fear. We need to talk." "About what?" I kept my tone neutral, calm. He cleared his throat. "There seems to be some confusion about your mother's estate and the business. Some old paperwork has surfaced that's causing unnecessary complications." Unnecessary for him, maybe. "What kind of paperwork?" I asked, though I knew exactly what he meant. "Legal documents. Agreements your mother apparently made without properly consulting me. I need to know what you know about them." I let the silence stretch. Let him squirm. Finally, I said, "Everything my mother wanted me to know." I heard him exhale sharply. "This can all be resolved quietly, Victoria. We're family. There's no need to involve lawyers or make this public." "I haven't made anything public," I said truthfully. "You're the one who filed for restructuring." Another silence. Longer this time. When he spoke again, his voice was harder. "We need to meet. Face to face. Clear this up before it gets out of hand." I glanced at the notes Mr. Brennan had prepared for this moment. "I'll have my lawyer contact you to arrange a meeting." "You don't need a lawyer." "Yes," I interrupted calmly. "I do." I hung up before he could respond. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. From something else entirely. Power. The meeting was held in a neutral conference room at Mr. Brennan's office. My father arrived with his own lawyer, a stern-faced man I'd seen at family events but never spoken to. I sat across from them, Mr. Brennan beside me, feeling surprisingly calm. There was no shouting, no dramatics. Just 4 people in a quiet room with documents spread across the table. Mr. Brennan spoke first, laying out the facts in clear, unemotional language. My mother had established legal protections for my stake in the family business and estate. Those protections had specific triggers, one of which was any attempt to restructure ownership without proper consent from all beneficiaries. By filing his paperwork, my father had activated those protections. The documents were legitimate, properly filed, and legally binding. My father's lawyer reviewed everything carefully, his expression growing grimmer with each page. Finally, he leaned over and whispered something to my father. I watched my father's face change as he realized the power dynamic had shifted permanently. He looked at me across the table, and for the first time in my life, I saw uncertainty in his eyes. He'd always been so sure of himself, so certain he could control any situation. Now, he was facing something he couldn't bully or charm his way out of. "This is absurd," he finally said, his voice tight. "Your mother and I built that business together. I'm not going to let some old paperwork destroy what we created." "You destroyed what you created," I said quietly. "When you pushed her out. When you humiliated her." His jaw clenched. Then he made one last attempt to regain control, using the only weapon he had left. "Shame." My father leaned back in his chair and shook his head slowly, like he was dealing with a difficult child. "You're really going to do this? After everything I've done for you?" His voice took on that familiar mocking tone. "You couldn't keep your marriage together. You're living alone in that tiny apartment. And now you want to tear apart the family over paperwork." He was trying to humiliate me again, the same way he had at the wedding. Trying to make me feel small, broken, unworthy. His lawyer looked uncomfortable but said nothing. Mr. Brennan stayed perfectly still beside me, waiting to see how I'd respond. I looked at my father and felt nothing. No shame. No anger. No desperate need for his approval. Just clarity. "You're right," I said calmly. "My marriage ended. I do live alone. And at the wedding, you made sure everyone knew you saw me as a failure." He started to interrupt, but I continued. "But here's what you don't understand. Humiliation only works when someone believes it. When they think your opinion of them matters. I leaned forward slightly. You don't get to define my worth anymore. You never did. You just convinced me you could. His face reddened. This isn't about worth. This is about you being vengeful and bitter. No, I said quietly. This is about me enforcing what's legally mine. What my mother made sure I'd have. That's not vengeance. That's justice. For several seconds, he said nothing. He'd lost his emotional control, and we both knew it. His lawyer cleared his throat. Perhaps we should focus on the legal matters at hand. We left that meeting with nothing resolved, but everything changed. My father couldn't intimidate me anymore, couldn't shame me into backing down. The documents were real. The protections were ironclad. And he knew it. That night, my sister Mallory called. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Victoria, we need to talk. Her voice was thick with tears. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know what he did to Mom, or what he was trying to do to you. I stayed silent, waiting. He told me you were causing problems, trying to take over the business, being vindictive about the divorce. He made it sound like you were the one trying to hurt the family. She took a shaky breath. But I talked to Aunt Rita. She told me the truth about Mom. And then I saw the documents and I realized. She broke down crying. I'm so sorry, Victoria. For the wedding. For not standing up for you. For believing him over you. Part of me wanted to stay angry, to make her feel the full weight of her betrayal. But another part remembered who we'd been before our father taught us to compete instead of support each other. He's always pitted us against each other, I said finally. Made us think we had to choose sides. I know, Mallory whispered. And I chose wrong. But if you'll let me, I want to stand with you now. Publicly. That offer meant more than she probably realized. I'll think about it, I said. We talked for another hour that night. Not solving everything, but starting to rebuild what our father had broken. 2 weeks later, a family meeting was called. Not by my father, but by the company board, relatives and business partners who'd seen enough to demand clarity. We gathered in the same conference room where the company had been making decisions for 30 years. My father sat at the head of the table, trying to project confidence. But everyone could see the cracks. I sat beside Mr. Brennan, with Mallory on my other side. She'd insisted on coming, on making her support visible. The board members asked questions. Pointed, specific questions about the estate, the business structure, my mother's role in building the company, and the documents that had surfaced. Mr. Brennan answered most of them, laying out the timeline with devastating precision. How my mother had contributed financially and strategically to the business for decades. How my father had slowly pushed her out, taking credit for her ideas, erasing her contributions. How she'd quietly protected her daughter's interests before she died, knowing exactly what her husband was capable of. The documents spoke louder than I ever could. Financial records, meeting minutes, emails, a clear pattern of manipulation and control. People who'd worked with my parents for years stared at the papers in disbelief. I had no idea, one board member muttered. Another looked directly at my father. Did you know about these protections? My father's jaw worked. I signed some documents years ago. I didn't think they'd ever be enforced. But you knew, the board member pressed. You knew what your wife had set up, and you tried to work around it anyway. My father had no answer. No jokes. No authority. The room went quiet. This silence was nothing like the wedding. It was final. My father looked around the table, searching for allies, for someone who would defend him or change the subject. No one spoke. For the first time in his life, he had no control over the room. His gaze finally landed on me. I saw something there I'd never seen before. A plea. He was waiting for me to speak, to offer him a way out, to show mercy. The old Victoria might have done it. The daughter who desperately wanted her father's love might have minimized everything, accepted a weak apology, let him save face. But I wasn't that person anymore. I stood up slowly, gathering my papers. Mr. Brennan stood with me. The legal protections my mother put in place will be enforced, I said clearly. I'm not asking for anything beyond what's legally mine, but I'm not accepting anything less either. My father's face went pale. Victoria, please. You're going to destroy everything. No, I said quietly. You did that yourself. Years ago. I'm just making sure the truth is visible now. I walked out of that conference room with my head high. Mallory followed me, then several other family members. Behind us, I heard someone ask my father another question he couldn't answer. The silence that followed me out the door wasn't defeat. It was the sound of a man realizing he'd finally lost control of the narrative he'd built his entire life on. And for once, that silence didn't frighten me. It felt like freedom. Over the following weeks, decisions were made. The board reviewed everything and voted to honor the agreements my mother had established. My stake in the family business was formally recognized. Financial arrangements were restructured to reflect reality, not my father's version of it. I could have pushed for more. Mr. Brennan suggested several legal avenues that would have publicly humiliated my father, damaged his reputation beyond repair, maybe even resulted in financial penalties. You have grounds, he'd said carefully, if you want to pursue them. I thought about it. I thought about the wedding, the laughter, the years of being made to feel small. I thought about what revenge would feel like. But then I thought about my mother, who'd chosen quiet protection over loud vengeance, who'd built safeguards instead of weapons. I chose restraint. I enforced what was fair, claimed what was mine, corrected the record. But I didn't destroy my father. I didn't humiliate him publicly or drag his reputation through the mud. That choice wasn't for him. It was for me. Because I realized something important. Becoming like him wouldn't make me strong. It would just make me him. The restraint hurt him more than revenge ever could. Because it meant I didn't need his destruction to feel whole. I just needed him out of my way. And that realization, that I'd moved on while he was still scrambling for control, was the real ending to his power over me. My father didn't lose everything. He kept his position in the business, though with diminished authority. He kept his reputation, mostly, though people now saw him differently. What he lost was control. The ability to manipulate the narrative, to shame people into submission, to make himself the hero of every story. He lost the fear people used to have of him, the automatic deference, the unquestioned authority. At family gatherings, the few I attended, people no longer hung on his every word. They questioned him, challenged him, made decisions without waiting for his approval. He became just another person at the table, not the king. I heard through relatives that he was struggling with the change, that he'd grown quiet, withdrawn, uncertain. Part of me felt sad about that. He was still my father, after all, despite everything. But mostly I felt relief. Relief that his power to hurt me was gone. Relief that I'd protected myself without losing myself. Relief that my mother's quiet planning had given me the strength to stand up when I needed to. The family dynamics shifted. Mallory and I grew closer, rebuilding our relationship slowly and carefully. Other relatives reached out to apologize, to reconnect, to acknowledge what had been obvious to everyone but never spoken aloud. The business stabilized. The estate was settled fairly. And I moved forward, financially secure but more importantly, emotionally free. Because what I gained wasn't just money or recognition. It was peace. The kind of peace that comes from knowing your worth doesn't depend on anyone else's opinion. 3 months after everything settled, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. I almost sent it to voicemail. I'd gotten careful about answering unknown calls. But something made me pick up. Victoria? This is Thomas Brennan. It took me a second to place the name. He'd been at the wedding, a business associate of my father's. I'd seen him laughing during the toast. Yes, I said carefully. I wanted to apologize. His voice was sincere, uncomfortable. For the wedding. For laughing. I didn't know the full context. I didn't understand what your father was really doing. He explained that after the family meeting, after the truth came out, he'd started seeing patterns in my father's behavior that he'd ignored for years. I told myself it was just his sense of humor, his way of keeping people sharp. But it wasn't. It was cruelty. And I enabled it by laughing. We talked for almost 20 minutes. He asked how I was doing, offered to support me professionally if I ever needed it. Before hanging up, he said something that stuck with me. You could have destroyed him. Everyone knows you had the power to do it. The fact that you chose not to says everything about who you are versus who he is. After the call ended, I sat quietly processing. That's when I finally understood why everything had happened the way it did. My father had built his identity on control, on making others feel small so he could feel big. The wedding toast wasn't about me at all. It was about him desperately trying to maintain that control as he felt it slipping away. And by refusing to play his game, by not striking back, by simply standing firm on what was fair, I'd shown everyone what real strength looked like. Not loud, not cruel, just steady. I never confronted my father again after that final board meeting. We crossed paths occasionally at family events, exchanging polite but distant greetings. He never apologized for the wedding, never acknowledged what he'd done to my mother, never took real responsibility for any of it. Some people don't change. Some people can't admit they were wrong without feeling like they've lost everything. I made peace with that. His journey wasn't my responsibility. My responsibility was to myself, to heal, to grow, to build a life I was proud of. I threw myself into work I cared about, reconnected with old passions, built new friendships with people who valued authenticity over performance. I started volunteering at a women's legal aid clinic, helping others navigate family disputes and estate issues. My experience became something that could help other people protect themselves. Mallory and I developed a real relationship, one based on honesty instead of competition. We talked about our mother, about the patterns we'd inherited, about how to break cycles instead of repeating them. The business continued. The family continued. But without the toxic dynamic that had poisoned everything for so long. People felt freer to speak up, to disagree, to exist without constantly managing one man's ego. And me? I finally felt like I could breathe. Like I could make decisions without weighing them against my father's approval. Like I could fail or succeed on my own terms, without someone waiting to use either one against me. The man who'd humiliated me at my sister's wedding now lived quietly with the consequences of his own behavior. And I lived loudly, fully, joyfully, without needing his permission to do so. Looking back now, I see everything differently. The wedding toast that crushed me became the catalyst for my freedom. My father's cruelty revealed his weakness, not mine. The humiliation I felt in that moment was real, painful, and deserved my grief. But it wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of me taking back my power. I learned that silence can be strategy, that patience can be strength, that the loudest revenge isn't shouting back or destroying someone. It's living so fully, so authentically, so peacefully that their opinions simply stop mattering. My mother knew that. That's why she didn't fight my father publicly or dramatically. She just built protections, created safeguards, and trusted that eventually the truth would surface on its own. She was right. I carry her wisdom with me now. When people try to make me feel small, I remember that their words only have the power I give them. When situations feel overwhelming, I remember that patient, strategic action beats emotional reaction every time. When I'm tempted to seek revenge, I remember that living well truly is the best response. The phone calls that exploded my life 2 months after the wedding weren't just about business or money. They were about revelation. About people finally seeing what had been hidden. About truth cutting through decades of carefully crafted lies. My father humiliated me in public. I didn't humiliate him back. I just stood firm on what was fair and let his own actions reveal who he really was. And that silence, that steady, unshakable silence, terrified him more than any words ever could, because he finally realized I didn't need his approval to know my worth. And that power? That's something no one can ever take from me again.